LCBN Television broadcasts 24/7 on UK Freeview Channel 271, Roku TV, Amazon Fire TV, Android TV, Apple TV, Google TV, See Love World, LCBNTV.com, LifeComTV.com.
Today we are going to talk about a topic that is close to me, is me, this thing of being mixed race and how it impacts our identity and who we are. And today I have another colleague. We worked quite closely together some years ago. I'm going to welcome her into the show after I read a little bit about her, and then she can share the rest of her story with you. Okay, Miss Keeley Taverner is a British Jamaican psychotherapist that started adulthood as a mother of 2 children, working as a cashier at IKEA while feeling trapped in an abusive relationship. She herself was raised by a single mother on a London estate where schools housed us rather than engineer our minds for success. I like that because she's saying the schools didn't do anything for them. They just were babysitting them. She left school with no qualifications, no prospects, no ambition or self-belief. She tried self-help books for solace, and one day she sorted out through an abandoned stock at the checkout, and she experienced her yellow bag epiphany moment when she heard her inner voice speaking to her loud and clear, saying, "Surely you can be better than this, Keeley." She listened hard, and step by step, brick by brick, she began rebuilding her life. From a woman's refuge to fighting for a place at university, to coaching prisoners, to running her own practice. Key for change, Keeley has been bold and is bold, passionate, and courageously defies all the odds, and she's now on a mission to help other people do the same. I welcome Keeley.
Thank you.
Hi, Keeley.
Thank you. Hey, how are you? Good to see you.
Well. Very interesting journey you've had. Would you like to share your journey with us a little bit more?
Yeah, I guess the thing for me is, it's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about helping people to find their greatness. So I studied a master's in I guess what I'm passionate about is the human potential. Mm-hmm. And I see anxiety and depression as signs that we are not in sync with ourselves. Mm-hmm. So I guess I come from a very different viewpoint. Plus, I think the beauty with myself on my journey is that I've walked the walk, and I'm very overt about that. I'm very clear with people that that's the case. Mm-hmm. Whereas sometimes psychotherapists aren't always transparent about, their journey. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. But personally for me, the way I work is I want people to know that, I've journeyed through this.
Okay. So you've taken the route of saying, if I'm open with my clients, they can identify with me, and that helps them in some way bridge this secrecy that we have actually in therapy, where you're going to a therapist's room and they don't know, we try to pretend that we're a blank canvas and the client doesn't know anything about us, about our history. So for you, sort of positioning yourself in saying, hey, I haven't had an easy road. This is my story. It helps the clients identify with you.
Yeah, most definitely. And it humanizes me. And it's for years I held back because the power dominant group, you know, we're told that we're not supposed to self-disclose, to remain, you know, sort of like you said, like a blank slate. And I just found it. Every coach that worked with me said the biggest thing about you, Keeley, is your story, yet you're not talking about your story. And I felt that as someone who works for myself, if I didn't begin to bring my journey, I wouldn't have been a therapist because, you know, as you know, the industry is actually a very middle class industry that promotes working for free. So there's a lot of volunteers, which often means when you want paid work, it's very difficult to get paid work because there's such a, you know, the training institutes are set up in a way that there's perpetual volunteers. So naturally, organizations aren't keen to employ when they can get that service from trainees who are desperate for placements. So being out here as a practitioner on my own, you know, I could talk abstractly about, you know, helping yourself, anxiety, depression, but my business changed when I began to talk about my journey and how I've got to be where I am. That's when things changed and people could identify with that. And that for me was like the decision that I've made to just carry on that path.
And I think that's where sort of coaching and counseling, I don't know whether to say clash, but you found a way where you've merged both ways of working with people.
Well, I think the challenge is I'm no longer feel restricted by a kind of panel, often who are not representative of the vast cultural diversity of the people I support, who dictate the rules. You know, so for me, I know, you know, culturally, you know, just as I was saying to you before we began, like, you know, Black folk, you know, there's something about my story that people really resonate with, and it helps people to feel that I'm real, especially when, you know, from a cultural perspective, we don't necessarily go to therapy. So breaking that stereotype, I think, is helpful for me, because then people are like, oh my God, that girl's real. You know, she's not like the therapist I went to see at my doctor's who I couldn't feel, they didn't get me. They're like, nah, that girl, she's real, and I want her to help me with my dilemma, because I talk about race, I talk about diversity, I talk about class, I talk about, you know, feeling inadequate. Class progression is a real double bind, you know, for people, because, you know, sometimes you feel like you've sold out, you've forgotten where you come from. You have to learn to navigate very different worlds, and you want to honor yourself. So I bring that to people, and I think, you know, the feedback so far is that people identify their own pain in that experience. So, you know, our training encourages us to be vulnerable, you know, so we've done the work, I've worked through my story, and I'm happy to self-disclose about situations that I'm well over.
And I think one of the aims of this program is actually to get people in our communities, in the BAME communities, actually to see counseling as a tool. Yeah. And why I've started to showcase people like you is to let people know that people like us actually are in therapy. People like us can access therapy. This is not something that upper, middle, white people alone need and can afford. This is something that we need to do to invest in our future. And I think your story is like perfect to show that actually this is something that we can use for ourselves to make life better for ourselves.
Yeah, and I think the stigma is one of fear and mental health, or you're mad. And for me, what I studied, and I funded my study privately because the school of thought that I wanted to study was not up for government funding. So I studied person-centered psychotherapy, which doesn't get government funding. But it was the form of therapy that made the most sense when I was constantly being told, do CBT, you'll never get a job, do CBT. But CBT didn't resonate with my soul. I had to do what I loved. And so, you know, there's lots of challenges around that. But I think for me, I see mental health problems as symbolic of us not fulfilling our potential. So I come from a very different school of thought. I see common mental health problems as a sign that you are out of sync, and there's things in your life that you are doing that are making yourself sad. And I help people to navigate, because I identify with, unlocking potential. Potential for me is what it's all about, and which is why I don't find the mental health label helpful, although a lot has been done of late to try to break down that stereotype. But for me, I'm always about human potential. And when you're not fulfilling your potential, or when you're, a yes person pleasing others, well, it's only a matter of time before you have anxiety and depression that show up in your life as signs to get you aware that something needs to change.
How, because I always say to my clients when they come that this idea that I'm feeling anxious or I'm depressed, we say it's mental health, and then people become sort of worried that other people are going to think they're actually unwell or they're mad. So I always say it's like going to the GP if you're not feeling well, and they give you a course of antibiotics, and it clears up and it prevents a far deeper problem, along the way. And if we can have intervention early, then we can treat these symptoms. They can be alleviated, they can go away. But which is what you're saying, that if actually we catch some of these things, we can treat them, and then we can find what the underlying root cause is, and then we become better people.
Yeah, it's a journey, I mean, by the time you end up at your doctor's, we know that the doctors are gonna, we also know Black people are more likely to be prescribed medication than one-to-one therapy. We also know that class matters when you're engaging with your doctor. Your capacity to, use language and how you come across has a significant impact on your treatment outcomes. And I think, I get it, because, I'm a grassroots girl who's educated myself. So I intimately understand what it means for people who are not from the power dominant group, and the fear that comes with it, which is why things end up often going to the extreme, because people in the power dominant group don't understand, if, for example, spirituality has been edited out of all NHS forms of treatment. Yet, spirituality for people who are from marginalized, disadvantaged groups, we know that spirituality is an important protective factor that enables us to manage, thrive, and strive in life, because we've had to walk by faith when, opportunities, it's not so clearly laid out, where we don't have, people in high places to give us privileged access. So, the challenge is when you start to bring all of you into, organizations, government organizations, with trainees, staff who have been trained by the system, who may not think as broadly, it's understandable. It's one of the factors why we're overrepresented in, mental health statistics. So I'm passionate about, making it accessible for people, but people have to pay, because I believe in the value of paying for what you want. There's a different respect you have when you pay. I'm not about just give people stuff for free. It's not helpful. It's not helpful. And it doesn't encourage you to gauge your agency. If we're spiritual people and we have awareness, then we know that if I say I want to see her and it's that much money, we can often find a way. Work with me, I'll work with you. And I want to encourage agency. I want to encourage people to take responsibility for themselves. If you go to the doctor, they're going to wham some pills down your throat. But you've still got people in your phone who stress you out. You're still a yes person. You've got a man in your life who gives you hell. Then what responsibility are you taking for your well-being? It's inevitable you'll be depressed.
Yeah. So it's about actually making a decision to change. What you're saying is just like you did, looking at it.
I don't know if it's about making a decision to change. I think the most important decision is acceptance that I can't do this on my own, firstly. And then, if they come to me, then, let me talk to Keeley. Because once you start to dig down into what some of the changes that need to happen, you know, we also know that some of that can be, you know, there can be a lot of blocks there. So I think the first instance is a kind of acceptance that I've gone as far as I can on my own, and I need to have a chat with someone. And that's why I tell people, let's just have a chat. Let's have a chat. Let me work out what's gone on with you and help you how to navigate, think about the way forward.
Okay.
So I take out all of that language.
All the barriers, all the big things.
All the barriers. Let's have a chat. Do you want a cup of tea? I'll get you a cup of tea, because I'm doing things on my terms. I don't work in the system. So if you came to my house, I'd offer you a cup of tea. So why not offer a client a cup of tea or water? It helps. All those small nuanced actions help to relax people, and then they feel like, half the time they feel like they know me because they've been watching my videos as well. So the rapport is already established.
So your way of working is to befriend the client, to make them feel comfortable, make them feel safe, we would say. They can identify with your story, and then they tell you theirs.
Well, yes, I think I humanize people. I humanize. It's human. You know, I want them to see my humanness. You know, so that they can be like, oh, it's not just me. Oh, I thought that was me who just did that. You know, so that it doesn't seem like beyond them. That they have access to somebody who they think, gosh, if she could do that. And that's why people come to me. That's why people come to me. And that's why I'm getting more and more clients who wouldn't traditionally go to therapy. Because they're like, no, I get her. Because they see the outcomes.
Yeah. And I think one thing I admire about you is your ability to challenge the system, which is what you're doing, you know, now. For me to, in some way, be a trailblazer, in some way to work differently. I have to be comfortable with the way I'm interpreting what I'm doing, offer it to my clients. They still have a choice whether to work this way or they want to work in a different way with me. So
yeah.
I know you do a lot of videos on social media. Yeah. What made you start doing that? What was behind that idea?
I saw a lot of people doing videos who I didn't think were qualified to talk about mental health, depression and anxiety, and I would always have something to say. And I thought to myself, well, if you've got, don't you go and do it then, because you're there criticizing people, and where's your videos? So I think that began to have an impact on me kind of criticizing others. But in addition, I felt that it was a good way to reach people with nuggets of gold, just to put things together, because, you know, I'd write, but I wouldn't get the traction. And video, at the time I started video was just starting to kick off. So I just kind of like felt like I knew so much, and that I had all this knowledge, yet my practice was quiet. I had the phone. Why not try? Like, why not? What's the worst that could happen? And so, you know, I can look at my first videos. That's why I keep them on my YouTube, and I can see how poor they are. But I'm not going to delete any of them, because they've been a catalyst to get me where I am now. So, you know, I embrace the journey. I embrace the ones I've got wrong, or, you know, sometimes some of them I can't even look at anymore because I'm like, oh my God, did I say that? But they all have fed into, you know, just why I can do an interview like this and be very comfortable. So every one of them has been helpful. And it's also, you know, if you think about what we do as therapists, it encourages me to get outside my comfort zone, you know, and that then empowers me, because, you know, the clients won't go where the therapist hasn't gone. I'm an avid believer of that.
Okay. Because I know a lot of therapists are a little wary about, you know, what happen, you know, people looking in and seeing what happens behind those closed doors when we close the clients. But you're very open about I watch some of your videos and I laugh, and some of them are really, you learn something from it. So, it's this idea of like almost bringing those questions we ask clients inside just on the screen and giving it to people for them to ponder.
Yeah, because we're suffering. So many of us are suffering with our eyebrows done and with long nails and with pretty hair. We're suffering. And so I think I often speak the uncomfortable truth, the inconvenient truths, but I'm passionate because I know what happens at the other end. I've worked in prisons. So, I see the far end. I too I am a single mother. I've got adult kids now, so it kind of doesn't feel the same as such. But, I get it, especially, for women and our intimate relationships, because I think so much of our childhood issues manifest itself in our intimate relationships. And I feel like if I kept saying to people, oh, you're depressed, it becomes a bore. But if I talk about man problems, it's different, because we can all identify with that. And people resonate. And then it makes sense. And then by the time they're like, Key, I need to talk to you, they come. And then what we look at begins with man problem. And then, that goes back into, relationships with parents, how we were loved, how we weren't loved, how we view ourselves. So, it's a beautiful way to do what I do in a way where I speak to the people in non-cryptic, language. I'm not going to sit here quoting, Freud's Oedipus complex. What's the point in that?
So the videos make you and the work relatable. Yeah, because
they're real. Yeah,
they're real, because usually you have a sort of liner at the end. You see, I've been watching your videos.
It's true. Do you know how many clients come here and sing to me when they go, and they're like, take care of you.
Yeah, so and sometimes you say something and I'm like, Keeley, but as you say, I sort of think about it, in the day, or it sort of stays. I must admit it does.
It's a slap line.
Yeah.
Yes, it resonate with you. If it chime with you, I speak to people's pain because I get it. I get it, and we are all battling. We all have our battles. We all have our battles, and I want to humanize that. It's not because you've got a mental health disorder. It's because sometimes life is horrible, and sometimes you give and you don't get back in return, and you're baffled. So one of the areas that I'm particularly passionate about at the moment is empaths and self-protection. What it means to be a highly empathic person, and how we have to learn how to protect our gift, because if we don't protect our gift of caring, it ends up feeling like a curse.
Yeah. Or the world asks you to change.
Or you become so filled with resentment, you end up changing, and then you become a twisted, nasty piece of work. Nobody wants to be around you.
Yes, and people wonder what happened to the nice person. You end up with something completely different.
And you lost yourself.
Yes. And what this concept of losing yourself, how far do you think, we've talked about somebody who's then impacted by life, but if we look back, you were talking about parents and the way that we were raised, what we were given or not given. Is that sometimes the way where we lose ourselves, where you lose your, the essence of who you are?
I think it's very unique to the individual, because some, I could be working with someone who's a high achiever, and for them, going to play the guitar is a massive life victory, because they were never allowed to indulge in those types of activities because everything was academia. So it's really unique to the individual to get them back to what resonates. I think for me, it's always about what resonates with your soul. And for some people, depending on how you've been brought up, sometimes you wasn't allowed to do what you liked or wanted to do. So I think for me, I don't know if people are lost. Sometimes I think they're finding themselves even, like discovering, unfurling who they are, discovering, it's a bit like yesterday. I have an online group called Pain into Purpose. And I was running the group last night, and I said, so I have a diverse range of people there, from diverse backgrounds. And I spoke about when I told my mum I was going to Thailand. I have a black mother, a white father. And my mother said, black people don't go to Thailand. And it just resonated with the other black people on the group who, we began to explore this narrow definition of blackness that no one teaches you. But if you step outside of it, you'll be told, well, that's black people don't do that. Well, you're not black enough. I was talking about the sort of mind boggle around acceptability and how stifling that can be when, I just wanted to go to Thailand to try something different, because I'd done Jamaica throughout all my childhood years and in my early adult years, and I just wanted to experience something different. So that's just one small example of the kind of cultural squashing that can also happen.
That can happen. Okay. I'm going to talk about something, because you sort of mentioned it, about your mom being black and your dad being white. Yeah. Which actually...
Which is rare, because it's rare, you see, because most people got the white mom called Tracy and the dad called Desmond.
So you're flipped, huh? You're the other side.
I'm the other way around. When they see my mom, they're like, okay, that's why you're like that. They're like, that's why you like that. Okay. She got black mom. It's okay, she got black mom.
Okay. That's actually interesting, because what I want to talk about is how this being mixed impacts us. When I mean us, I mean I'm mixed. My father was Lebanese and my mother is Nigerian. Yeah. And how, do people get lost in not knowing who they are? We're talking about getting lost and finding or discovering yourself. How do we hold it? How do we hold both worlds? Or sometimes, in some cases, 2 or 3 worlds and cultures. And you just explain your mom saying, actually, black people don't do that, but it's something white people do. Yeah. And where's the permit, and how do we actually hold that? So let's talk a bit about your history.
I think one of the areas of diversity that doesn't get talked about is class diversity as well. So I also had, a father who lived in an affluent area, and I grew up with my mom on an estate in northwest London. So I would be exposed to life in suburbia, and then, go back to St. Raph's and have to I had to learn to navigate these very different worlds with different codes of conduct, let's say. And I think shame and humiliation was definitely a part of that, because there was things that we did on our estate that you just don't, where I grew up with my mum, if you run out of sugar, you go and knock Bev. Where my dad lives, you don't knock the neighbors. You go to the store. It's just all these little nuances, there's all these little differences. And I think navigating that world is a very delicate dance. And I think as you get older, I use humor. So sometimes I use humor and I'll laugh about things. I'll throw out statements and jokes. But I think there is something very tricky about finding yourself, anchoring yourself in a world, especially in the West, where they want you to fit a label. Go into any government agency, go to your dentist, doctors. They want you to fit a box, like mixed, African, Caribbean, and that can be very difficult. I can be, you can also, you have shadism as well.
White passing.
And I think, shadism is mass. It is, and in my younger years, it was something that I indulged in because I appreciated getting privileged treatment, because I was light skinned when I went to Jamaica. I was like, wow, like the guys don't even look at me at home, but here you guys all think I'm hot stuff. I indulged in it until I kind of realized that my mother's color was perceived as being low So in Jamaica, they'd always say, oh, I had high color, you have high color. And kind of really beginning to understand what that meant. And I felt immense shame realizing I was indulging in that. And obviously it would be at the expense of my mother, who's a dark-skinned woman. And so I'm very much about challenging people about, good hair. Oh, you've got good hair. I have children from a black man. So obviously my children's hair is more on the Afro side than my own. And I think renouncing the kind of light-skinned thing is really important for me to challenge people, because I have a darker skinned and a lighter skinned daughter, and then the darker skinned one's like, Mama, am I a lighty? And I'm like, Jesus Christ, so it's and I think also, people talk about white privilege, but as a mixed race individual, I have had access to white privilege. And I think it's really important that is acknowledged, because when I was, a young teenage mother, it was actually having access to white privilege that's got me where I am. Because I didn't have to go and sign on. I didn't have to go and beg a council house. I didn't have to wait 20 years to be housed like many of my friends from my estate. I was able to move to the suburbs and slowly, study and make something of myself without that pressure. And I think, I use that privilege to open the doors for others. And I think I'm not saying every light-skinned person, every mixed race person has access to white privilege, because not all white people, are middle class either. But for me, it's been really important to sometimes use that to my advantage, because I know that I'm more palatable to the power dominant group. I'm less of a threat, because, either they might have a curly haired child in their family, and they'll tell you to, or, we just know that we know from television media that lighter skinned people, the closer to white, are more likely to get privileged treatment over your darker skinned counterpart.
Yeah.
And I think as the child of a black woman who overtly has seen the discrimination towards my mother is something that is so important to me, that I'll rebuke, challenge people who want to pedestal me for something I have no choice over. Just born this way. We don't choose.
Well, yeah, we don't choose. And this idea that half of us is okay, so that's what makes us okay. So
and then there's the whole concept of halves. I'm not half. I'm full. I'm whole. I don't learn half my dad's white culture, half Jamaican culture. One assimilates. I assimilate worlds. I assimilate and navigate within them all. I'm not half of anything. And my children, somebody said to your children are quarter caste. Brethren, what the hell does that mean? They're not quarter of nothing. They're black children.
And
that's that.
Yeah, I've heard people ask, what mix are you? Like your food or cocktail or something. Like, they're not talking about a human being. It's like, what mix are you? What kind of a question is that? And I think growing up here is different from me. I grew up in Africa. Yeah. And it's a balance, I think, because sometimes you're welcomed and sometimes you're always seen as the outsider. And I have people who still till today call me sort of what is white in pidgin English. Yeah.
And is that regarded? Is that a derogatory word, or is it? I don't know.
Well, if we actually look at it in sort of in the context of it, there is something not, because they use it to infer, sometimes when they're talking about white people. Yeah. So
don't you hate that when you're with a group of black people and they're talking about white people and they're like, yeah, sorry about that, and you're like,
Yes. Or sometimes I will get questions asked like, "Oh, is the food okay?" We know you know they would use this word. It's Onyibo. They will say, "Oh, you are Onyibo," which means like you are white. You know, and these like black people that I've known for a long time. Like, and you know, sometimes I'm thinking, whose side? You know, like, what's going on here?
What is this about? What is this
What is this
about?
really
Yeah,
about? You know, like, what is this
yeah,
really about?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I've gone into a Caribbean takeaway and the woman's asked me if I know what plantain is. I said,
Yes,
what
yes,
is
that's
it
a good
fried?
example. Yeah,
You know, it's
like what? You know,
yeah,
so sometimes it's almost like even when we feel okay with ourselves, the environment doesn't always feel okay with
yeah.
uh, biracial, mixed race, whatever you want to call
Well, and
us.
I guess that in itself is the challenge because they keep giving us different names. You know, over the years, there's been lots of different names. Now we're called dual heritage, you know, but you know, and that in itself, you know, it's a bit like I can use black and mixed race interchangeably because you know, some days you might be in a black circle and you say black and people will be like, you're not black. And you think, okay, let's
Yeah,
revert back to mixed race.
yeah.
So, you know, so you kind of use that fluidly. And what I've done, which is what you may have noticed in my bio, is I talk about geographical locations. You know, so I have a
I
mum
did.
with Jamaican heritage, a British father. Like, put that in your pipe and smoke it. See where you want to box me from that, because it's bizarre.
Yeah,
It's just bizarre.
it
But
is.
I also find that as a mixed race woman who dates black men, I think people view you, I think, mixed when you're mixed. You may be different because you're coming from a different environment as someone who's been brought up here. But it always feels to me that people classify my identity according to the partner that I'm with.
Okay. So if you're
So
dating
because
a
I have,
white man, you're white.
well, I don't date white. I don't date white. No
Just
discrimination. No
no
discrimination. No, I
discrimination
love my daddy's people, but
they're
you
not for
know,
you.
they're not for me. Not for me. So yeah. So when you know when you date, it's almost like people are like, okay, you know, it's a bit like Obama and Michelle, isn't it?
Yeah.
Come on, man. When we saw dark skin woman, we was like, yes.
Yes. You know, I was trying to explain to somebody how the term half caste is a derogatory term, and it took me over half an hour. And he was saying, no, in Nigeria, when we say that, where you know, it's like they're describing you to be something. I'm like, I'm not half of anything, just like, and not to use a caste system, which means half of me is acceptable. And for like half an hour, we're going round, and I was trying to explain, no, this is not how you refer to people. But that's what we were told when we were growing up. We called people like you, meaning me, half caste. So sometimes we it's like it feels like we're not accepted on the black side, and we're not accepted on the
But
white side
with
either.
that battle, I feel far more safer with black people.
Than
So
white
even though there can be these little backlashes or funny statements, I feel far safer because the backlash doesn't have the same venomous impact on me as it has when I've been rejected by white people.
people. Okay.
And I am a black woman's child, and I think that has an impact as well. So that, you know, it's the bosom I've grown from. So my comfortableness around that is, you know, it's second nature because, you know, that's my mum, and I think you take more from your mother. The more I become secure in myself,
Maybe
and I think the more I'm less affected by people's weird statements, the more I'm just grounded in me. But then, you know, when I've left here and gone to the Caribbean, it's a very different experience in terms of identity and, you know, what it means. So I just find that very interesting that, you know, for in Britain, they have labels that you don't know what they quite mean. It's a bit like BAME, ethnic minorities, you know, there are all these sort of loaded names. In the Caribbean, they say what they see. I don't mind that. Brown skin, yeah, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that because it's not loaded. I find in the West, there's these loaded statements that you need to sort of break down and understand what they mean. Whereas white people, wherever I've gone, I've never known them to be called an ethnic minority. I've never known them to be called nothing but white. So there's something about
they're ethnic in that country.
Yes, but they're never called ethnic minorities.
They're a minority in that country. Does that make sense? So in a country like an African country now, they would have, large groups of white people working, but they aren't
because they're always called white
or a name. That's what you're saying.
See, but that just goes to show who has the power of labeling. The power of labeling is with the white power dominant group.
Yeah. But that
because they're never labeled.
Language and what they're giving out to us. Yeah. That goes back to the idea that the English language is what we use, and it belongs to the dominant group, the dominant power group. Okay. Do you feel that sometimes mixed race people have to choose?
I think it depends on the uniqueness of your experience. Mixed race is a generic term for a very unique experience. And so for me as a therapist, yes, if I'm working with someone who's mixed, there's going to be similarities, but I need to understand, I've been brought up in a black area in West London. If you've been brought up in Scarborough and you're the only mixed race child in the village and your mum doesn't even know how to comb your hair, your experience is going to be very different. So I think it's unique, and I'm very adamant about understanding the uniqueness of someone's experience in relation to identity, because because it matters. Just as you're mixed, and because you've been brought up in Africa, your experience is going to be very different from mine.
For
so
sure.
I think we have to be very tentative and curious about what it means for that individual.
I think sometimes you see almost, I think our journey has been unique, and I think from the counseling and the training, there's this acceptance of self, and this idea that I'm unique, I'm different, and I sit well with that. I think I'm talking about people who maybe are not quite sure.
But you see, I think I would contend that as a woman who's been brought up in the motherland, you would be far more immunized from prejudice and racism than someone who's been brought up in it. That's what I've noticed. That you'll have a stronger identity and sense of self. Plus your culture and customs are intact. I'm from the Caribbean diaspora. You see, so much of the original customs and have been annihilated. So I think there is something really important about understanding the context, the cultural context that you've been growing up in. Because if you're born in the motherland, you'll see Black professionals and on billboards, on the news. Whereas growing up in London, you won't see that. You wouldn't see that. So I think there's a stronger sense of self from people who are born in their home countries. That's my observation.
Okay. So what you're saying is where I agree completely, because even sometimes when we're talking about racism and its impact, I always say to people who grew up in Africa that they don't really get it. They don't get it as somebody who was born and raised here, because, as you said, growing up in Nigeria, I was the minority. For once, there weren't that many. There were a few people that looked like me, but most of the other people were Black, in positions of power, in government, making decisions. So you weren't looking, for somebody else, but these were, the important people. So what you're saying is, if I grew up in Africa, I will feel myself a little bit more than somebody who maybe growing up here.
I think you have a stronger sense of self.
Oh.
My mum can go back to the Caribbean. Majority of the family have left because of the way that, capitalism has decimated the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
People aren't able to earn a living. We are, I'm a descendant of slavery. So we know that the original customs and that are gone.
Mm-hmm.
If you're from, your village, you can go back to, you can trace your history. You can find your grandmother in the village or the place where you've been brought up. I think that, and you've been exposed, we know the importance of subliminal programming. You would have been exposed to seeing Black professionals. It's not the same as here when that's not been on. So people don't have a concept of Black professionals, especially for people from the lower stratas.
Yeah.
So I think there's a stronger a sense of self that comes from people who have been brought up in their homelands in Black countries than say, someone from my position.
Mm-hmm. 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 Because in my case, my father was an immigrant. Yeah, he was an immigrant in Nigeria who'd come to work in Nigeria because there was a war in Lebanon, and quite a large number of his family had come to Nigeria. So a lot, and I had he lived and worked and died in Nigeria. I had to go back to Lebanon really to meet his family, find some of my roots that are there, meet cousins I had never known and would never have known if I didn't go. And I think now that I'm older, I actually identify more with that part of me than I did when I was younger. Because when I was younger, I just knew the African, the African or the Nigerian part of.
Make sure you knew.
Yes. I think African mothers are quite strong, which I think if you have a Black mother, she really tries hard to make sure that you get it. You get who you are. You have that sort of acceptance of who you are. And I think actually mothers are quite influential in mixed race children, because how mother identifies impacts on how the child identifies.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So with that, do you think that then influences the decision of the child?
Well, it shapes your identity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Shapes your identity. And then, and that's the thing, is the uniqueness of the individual. It shapes your identity. So, those things my mum was going through about her own identity. So when I was a child, my mum had curly perm, and then by the time I was in primary school, she became a Rasta.
Mm-hmm.
So she went deep into the culture. Mm-hmm. And obviously, here we got this dark skinned red, gold and green lady, but now she's got mixed race kids. Mm-hmm. So that was a bit of a bind, because people would find that a bit surprising. Mm-hmm. So all of it, we're sponges, we absorbed. And for me, the gift of therapy is just, which is why I had a mixed race therapist as well. I was very adamant. I wanted a therapist who I felt would be able to understand the kind of paradoxes and contradictions and that I have to navigate and, and contend with in order to, as a single mom on my own, I have to navigate, make sure I keep things intact in order to achieve my goals. When you're trying to become a professional and you're not from those circles, it's very difficult. But, someone always takes me under their wing. A Black woman, Esme Martins, my dearest friend, took me under her wing and helped me to understand the nuances, the things that people don't say, but they frown upon, because if you don't know the nuanced part of the behaviors in middle class circles, it's very difficult.
You
I am just mindful. I have a client in, so
So if you're going to leave us with something, what would it be?
I would say make your pain purposeful. Pain is an inevitable part of life. We all go through pain. We all go through hardship. But hidden in every painful experience, there is a nugget of gold that you can find where you can learn uncomfortable life lessons that could revolutionize your life. We start small, step by step. That is something I promote day in, day out. I have an online program. It's what I help people to do, is to accept that you can't just be living happy all the time, and that sadness is a part of life. But we also need to learn lessons in those moments so that we can make changes to live more abundantly.
Okay. Can you tell us where to find you? Somebody wants to come to chat with you.
So if you're looking for me, yes. So I have a YouTube channel. You can search Key for Change. That's FOR Change. And you can also find me at keyforchange.com. Just come up on the screen.
Okay.
Keyforchange.com.
Thank you very much, Keeley. I hope you'll come back again to share some of
No
your
problem.
knowledge and insight. Thank you.
Likewise. All the best.
Another interesting evening, talking about identity and race and its impact, and how counseling can help us sort of come together and find who we are and our inner self. I'd like to thank Keeley again for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you next week.
LCBN Television broadcasts 24/7 on UK Freeview Channel 271, Roku TV, Amazon Fire TV, Android TV, Apple TV, Google TV, See Love World, LCBNTV.com, LifeComTV.com.